Hey guys, Rebel Gray here today, and I'm going to talk to you about red commons from the Awakening set. We're going to chat about a little bit about why commons are important and what you should look for when selecting ones for your deck. So don't go anywhere because we're just getting started. All right, so commons, right? Why is he making a video about commons, you might ask? Well, that's actually a pretty simple answer. You get three every single time you open a pack in Destiny, right? Some of those cards are really, really good, and just because you crack a lot of them doesn't mean that they're not worth looking at. This is pretty much a rule in CCGs. You get the most commons. Commons are the thing you get the most out of in a pack, and a lot of times commons are the backbones of a lot of deck. And Star Wars Destiny really is no different in that regard. So, with that said, we're going to take a look at just six of the better red commons from the Awakenings set, just to get our feet wet with these videos and to see if you guys like what I have to say or not. It's probably not going to stop me from making videos either way. So, the first one we're going to talk about today is Cannon Fodder. This is a very simple card. You deal damage to yourself with an opponent's die, and you remove it from the pool. Neat, right? But Gray, why would I want to deal myself damage? The short answer is strategy. Actually, sometimes removing a single black die side can nullify all of your opponent's modified die side which are in the pool. It can be actually a really pro move. Hero has a blue card just like this called Heroism that resolves a opponent's die in the same way against one of their unique blue characters. This one is only for non-unique characters, so it's a little different, but it's also kind of more useful in the context of Destiny. Cannon Fodder, doesn't see a lot of high-level play, but it has a place in decks that aren't running a lot of Guardian characters, or a deck like Phasma, which can give the non-uniques Guardian, but also has maybe other decks that have two or three non-unique characters. It's very simple. It has a spot in a very simple beginner deck, like Death Trooper times 3, for example, is a fantastic deck. I have a Death Trooper times 3 deck because it's just stupid fun to play. Um, and I'll probably make a video on that particular deck later. But Cannon Fodder's utility resides really in knowing what die to remove and when to remove it to make the damage that you did take less, hopefully far less than the damage you might have taken. So this is like a plan for the future kind of thing, or look at the odd sides, look at the sides of an opponent's die, and think about the odds. Like if they're going to re-roll their other dice that are modified side, what are the odds that they're going to roll into a black side that they can then use to resolve their blue stuff? Cannon Fodder is going to really help you out a great deal in just making the selection and the decision making for your opponent that much harder. And there's another card in Hero called Confidence that does something sort of very similar in terms of how you might play it decision-wise. But that card is not relegated solely to resolving a damage die. But I'm going to talk about that card in another video, however, in the future. So the next one up is Defensive Position. Defensive Position is a conditional removal card. But it is so good that it has become a staple in just about any deck that is playing Red Hero. Much of the game's useful removal is either 0 or 1 cost, and when you compare this card alongside some of the other removal, you'll see that it's actually kind of rare when a card has the potential to remove multiple dice for just 1 resource. The real cost of Defensive Position is that you need to control the battlefield. And some decks don't have a problem with that in Hero. Anything that's fast, that runs Poe in the current meta, or Snap can really hang on to the battlefield pretty consistently, making this card an absolute shoo-in for those decks. And I like to refer to this card as part of the red removal suite. It always has a spot because it can remove 2 of Vader's dice, 2 of IG-88's dice, 2 of Palpatine's dice, 2 of Han Solo's dice. The list can go, on and on. And for the small condition built into it, and the 1 resource, it can literally make or break the round of a game. It can turn a tide. I mean, it really just can't. And I've used defensive position in ways that has turned the tide before. So, just a few moments ago, I mentioned the red removal suite, and Field Medic is one of those cards that is part of that particular set of cards. And that set of cards, when you throw in some yellow stuff, can include Electroshocks, Negotiates, Loth, Cat, and Mouse. We're talking about the hero stuff that removes dice, which isn't just relegated to red. And the red removal suite in itself is not that great. It's red and yellow together that really makes a difference. And yellow is what brings sort of the powerhouse to it. But Field Medic is different because it doesn't remove a die from the table at all. But it does allow you to heal 2 damage from a character, which in some sense is kind of like negating a 2 damage die later in the game, whether it's later in the round, later in the game, whatever the case may be. It can turn the tide of a game of rounds because it can set your opponent back that 2 damage, or 4 if you end up finding both of them in your hand or from your deck throughout the course of a game. And the best part is, it doesn't have a spot restriction. So you just need to splash some red in your deck in order to have this. So you can heal your characters like Snap, Ray, Maz, or your big guys like Poe, your Bazes, your Leias, your Akbars, your Padmes. This has a spot in Mill because of there is some red cards in Mill. And it just, again, sets your opponent back a little bit. So it's essentially kind of like a removal card, but doesn't function exactly the same way as your typical removal stuff. The next card we're going to talk about is probably one of the most powerful commons in Awakenings, and it's Hit and Run. Hit and Run reads that it has Ambush, and you activate one of your red characters. This card single-handedly can decide games. Its value out of hand starts at a very good power level from round 1 of the game, meaning no matter when you play it, it's good. But later in the game, after you played several upgrades on 1, 2, maybe 3 of your characters, its value only gets better. And I'll give you a simple example. Earlier today, I was playing in a quarterly kit tournament down at Highlander Games in Boonton. I was playing my base Snap deck, which I'm aware, this is the tier 2 deck, but I love Red Hero. And I was rolling horrendously in this particular game. I was rolling a blank and a special on Base's dice pretty much every single turn. But I was able to get some upgrades on him throughout the course of the game. And he was rolling pretty poorly too. He was trying to play Disrupt. He was resolving resources. He had a lot of resources out. He killed Snap. And at the end of the round before I actually won, I used all the cards in my hand. I had some Guerrilla Warfares that I had dumped just to do 1 damage with Ambush to ping off his shields. And I had 2 cards left in my deck. And I knew one of them was Hit and Run because I looked through my discard and I'm like, what else is in there? And I think the other one was a collateral damage, but it didn't matter because I was just like, I need this Hit and Run. So I had an Overkill, I had a DH-17, and I had a Holdout Blaster on my base. And I'm staring across the field from a Han Solo with, I believe, a Fast Hands on him. And my base is sitting at 9 damage out of 11 health. If he rolls out any kind of damage in Fast Hands, that's it. It's game. I lose. I'm now, I'm going to be 0-2 at this point because I lost my first round to the person who eventually won the tournament. And I said, okay, what am I going to do? Well, I've got Hit and Run, so I'm going to Hit and Run. I'm going to activate Baze. Lo and behold, I rolled out 11 damage, and I literally one-shot Han Solo. He had no damage on him, but I was able to strip his shields in the previous turn. And he had just drawn his second chance, which was going to be the first thing that he did on his turn. But because a Hit and Run allowed me to activate Baze, I rolled incredibly well, almost max damage. I used the Ambush action to resolve the damage. He doesn't get to go. So that literally decided the entire game. If I hadn't drawn the Hit and Run, I would have lost. I would have absolutely lost. A lot of that has to do with just poor rolls in the beginning of the game, whatever, but Hit and Run turned that game around. It essentially did decide that game, and it was a pretty amazing play. So, again, this is going into the sort of the theme of anytime a card lets you do 2 things for 1 thing, it's probably worth taking a look at least. And Hit and Run is absolutely one of those. So the next one is pretty much the same, you know, in terms of allowing you to do extra things. So logistics is a very simple card, and it shines right now because there aren't a ton of easy ways to just gain an extra resource, right? You know, you've got some stuff in other colors like smuggling where it's like, oh, you can discard a card, or long con where you're discarding one and getting 3 resources off the second one, or in rage, which is doing a damage to, you know, Kylo or whatever blue character you're playing. Logistics just says, hey, if you can resolve a die showing resource and just gain an additional resource. So, you know, a lot of characters have resource sides in their die. And the best thing about logistics, again, it doesn't say it has to be a red die. It can be any die. It can literally be a gray die. It doesn't really make a difference. So it gives you just an additional resource. Awesome. Great. It's giving me 2 resources for 1 die, which is essentially exactly the same amount of resources I get during my upkeep. So now you're doubling my output for this turn. It's such a clutch card, and it sees a lot of play in casual all the way up to competitive because it's a neutral, number one, so you can include it in hero and villain decks. It's free to play, so it doesn't, you know, when you're talking about things like some of the more advanced tactics in Destiny, like cost curves and stuff like that, this is sitting pretty at 0. So you're not worried about cost curve. You can always play it as long as you meet the condition of having a resource die, which, let's face it, it's going to happen at some point. And a lot of decks are splashing red, if not for their main character, sometimes for, you know, an off character. You're seeing a lot of the current meta splashing things like First Order Stormtrooper, you know, because he's a 7-coster. Or you've got some really strong heroes in red. You've got FN2199 right now, who doesn't mind rolling resources at all. And 1 logistics basically sets up almost his entire game when you think about it. So this is not a card to be counted out. You know, it goes into that mode, into that pile of cards that does 2 for 1. And what it does is it's saying, I resolve a die and I'm getting another resource on top of that. So it's not exactly like a 2 for 1, like hit and run where I'm activating and then ambushing, or Ray where you're dropping a Vibro Knife and doing 2 for 1. But it's in that similar vein of giving you an additional advantage just for doing something you would normally do, which is resolve that resource die. Well, instead of 1, I get 2. And if a die is showing 2 resources as we go into the next meta, you're going to get 3. So just think about, you know, how good that has the potential to be. I think logistics is gonna see play for a really long time, and being able to recognize this card as good as a person is what makes you know, a good deck choice good. And sometimes when you cross a card like this in the meta, you're looking at it being a great deck choice. You know, if you got 30 cards, this is a great choice in many of the decks that are currently running it, especially in the competitive meta. So last but not least is squad tactics. There's a lot that you could say about this card, but it's very straightforward. Activate any number of non-unique characters at once, so they all activate at the same time. Great. It's not seeing a ton of play right now, except for like in some of the aforementioned stuff like Death Trooper ×3, for example, or some of the 4-wide decks, because, well, there's not a lot of decks where you play all non-uniques or even multiple non-uniques, unless you're talking about something like a Phasma deck, who's using those non-uniques in sort of a different way. But squad tax certainly can be used with that Phasma deck, which usually runs 2 non-unique characters that gain the Guardian keyword to Guardian 2 dice at once. So, you know, it's just that, again, 30 cards in a deck, sometimes you have to pick and choose, and squad tactics doesn't always make the cut. It's something like that. At its core, this is a card that is an action saver. Again, it's 2 for 1, right? I activate multiple characters. Even if you activate just 2 characters with it, you're getting value because it's saving you 1 additional action. You're activating 2 additional characters, which is 3 in all. It's saving you 2 actions. And in those 4-wide decks where you're talking about 4 non-unique characters, you're saving 4 actions for 1 action. So it's saving 3, really, is what it is, what it math out to be. That's pretty amazing, you know? And when you're talking about how activation is so closely tied to things like having upgrades on your characters, its value, like hit and run, increases as the game progresses. So that A squad tactics in round 1 is maybe only going to roll in 3 dice, you know, maybe 4 dice. But a squad tactics in round 4, if the game goes that far, might be activating those 3 or 4 characters, each with an upgrade on them. That's doubling your amount of available dice. So when to play this game, this particular card in a game is very, very important. But its value is only going to increase as long as your deck is doing what it's supposed to do, which is play upgrades, get some additional dice out on the table. You know, and when you plan your upgrades well and then break this out, you're going to find it's going to have a really, really high effect. It's going to be a really hot card. And it's going to keep seeing play as long as, you know, there's non-unique casual decks or swarm-style decks. And if and when those decks can start winning some actual competitive stuff, Squad Tactics is going to be a pretty scary card. So right now you don't see it in high-level play, but at the casual tables, but you will totally see it. And again, in those red villain decks, the Stormtrooper decks, the Death Trooper decks, decks with a lot of Guavian Enforcers, TIE Pilots, stuff like that. Because those are good non-unique characters and they do see some play. So if this card has a spot in a deck and it can work really well, you bet your ass it's gonna see play. So all right, guys, that about wraps up my talk on these 6 cards. I hope I've given you at least one new player a perspective on why these cards are clutch in the right situations and in the right decks. Remember that knowing how to look at a card is more important than simply net decking, adding the card to your deck, and trying to win. You know, understanding is what will make even a mediocre deck good in the hands of a really smart player. So I really thank you guys for listening, and until next time, may the force be with you.